we all have the opportunity to choose. Am I going to look for a way to connect and assist? Or am I going to look for a way to fall back to what I'm comfortable with? The moment somebody's statements make you uncomfortable, that's the moment that it's most important to listen and to try to understand. And I think if we could just
Absolutely.
remember that and take that into more of our conversations, we'll be able to connect with more people.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I'd like to welcome our guests. But I want to stop here and acknowledge a couple of things that I deem very expensive that they're coming to spend with us. And I want to honor them. Time, 24 hours has been given to every man and woman on this planet. And yet, Michael is here to spend some of this quality commodity with us. And I want to honor him for that. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator, and he's going to allow us some access into it so that we can learn some of those insights that he got as a result of his journey. So we want to take the time and say thank you so much for coming here and sharing both of these precious commodity with us at Threads of Enlightenment. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor, man. This is my custom here that I always start this podcast with. As I mentioned to you, I believe there are two aspects of our journey, the independent aspect and then the interdependent piece that we talk about, and that's the servant, as I mentioned. My question to you is this: how do you serve mankind?
In as many ways as I can. So on the surface, it can be from teaching as a profession to helping people that I bump into every day. And I can give you a bunch of examples of those. And every time I board an airplane, one of the things I look for right away is, does somebody need help putting their bag in the overhead bin? To coaching youth sports and spending extra time with kids, to my family just rescued another puppy because, you can never have too many rescue puppies. So my wife and son say. But I think, to your point, when it comes to like serving mankind, it is looking for the opportunities to help people where many other people wouldn't look. So if we're driving down the road and someone's pulled over with a flat tire, or maybe I'm late for a meeting and I don't have the time to stop, but if I've got 45 minutes to give, well, let's stop and do that. So I feel like at the human level, we all have the opportunity to give something, to do something, to help someone, and choosing to have the mindset to look for those opportunities versus choosing to have the mindset to rationalize away those opportunities is something that we probably all are faced with more than once a day.
I absolutely believe that. And so I'm excited about it to talk to this, because you mentioned it's a mindset that we have. One has to be in a place where you want to do that. And I've met many people that are not in that mindset. They just want to move ahead and do their thing. And so we've seen many of those before and what they look like on this planet. One of our customs that we do here on this earth is to go back, because I tell people it's the beginning. I call it the beginning of our beginnings, if you will, our family. This is a place that we learn a lot of things about education. We learn about communication. We learn about how we deal with people, how all this stuff happens right there. And a lot of times, sometimes trauma happens there as well. What was your family unit like?
I'm extremely lucky. I'm close with my parents are still married. I'm close with them. I have one brother. He's my best friend. Like a lot of people growing up, sure, we had our ups and downs and we had our tough times and disagreements and all of those things. But looking back, I'm extremely fortunate to have the family that I have. And when you talk about, learning how to communicate with others and how to solve problems, and my father is somebody who kind of made his own way in life, to over summarize it, and had to work his way up in order to get to where he was. So he taught my brother and I a lot about hard work and dedication and quality, but even more importantly, taking care of each other and looking after the family. And he certainly taught us a lot about strategic thinking and strategic planning and navigating difficult situations. My mother is another amazing human being. She's in many ways a self-made woman, and had a lot of jobs where she had to, to deal with stress and make decisions. And is a very compassionate person. I mean, they both are, but if you look at kind of the traditional roles, she's a very compassionate person and did a lot to teach my brother and I that side as well. So I think you can draw a pretty direct line to the family upbringing that I had and where I ended up today.
That is a great gift, if you will, that mom and dad were able to offer you, both the compassion side and as you said, the critical thinking skills that you received from your dad. With all of that being poured into you, what was your relationship like outside of the family with others? How did that training, if you will, impact your relationship with others?
I think there's a couple different ways to look at that at different stages. So, as a kid, and I say kid really, all the way up through my teenage years, I was very socially awkward. So I didn't always fit in very well, didn't always have lots of friends, but I knew that I always had that core family unit at home. So it was that, as George Kohlreiser would call it, that secure base, or as Borrego KG would call it, that now that I'm quoting him, safe harbor. So I knew I always had that secure base, or that safe harbor at home, which was very important to me. But I think as I grew into my own person, as I got older, the lessons came home to roost even greater, because now I had the chance to apply them and to use them and to really turn them into my own, whether it is with my own family or with my clients or my community relationships that I have now.
Yeah. And as you're moving through life, because we're just chronicling the main program, if you will, that people tell us that we ought to walk in this planet when we're here. And that is, we get the family, we go to school, and then we get a degree, we get a job, but they never talk about the other aspects of life. When I had a guru that told me, she said, let life disturb your comfort. And as we are walking through comfortable, if you will, life comes in the middle of all of this stuff that they've been telling us, and boom, and toss us some wonderful things that they never talk about. And so how we respond to all those things as life, as she would say, is where our lessons are. As you're moving through and doing your comfortable thing and you're looking at college, what college did you pick as far as your degree, and why did you pick it?
Well, I actually ended up attending two separate colleges. So the first college I chose because I didn't have awesome grades. So it was a state school for me. And there was a
Yeah.
particular state school that had a pretty decent teaching program. And my goal at that point was to teach I ended up in middle school, but to teach high school special education and coach sports. So I chose a school because it was a state school I could get in. It wasn't
Hmm.
expensive. Well, it wasn't exorbitantly expensive for my parents. And it had the degree that I wanted. So
Yeah.
after leaving that school, I ended up starting out as a teacher. And from there, some of your listeners might remember the 1990s. So I had some friends who were in the financial industry making a lot more money than I was. And I was apparently
Yeah.
a little bit more susceptible to peer pressure than I recognized. So I let them talk me into trying that, and pretty quickly found out it wasn't for me. So at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. You talk about life throwing you curveballs. So I went back to school to get a business degree. And honestly, I chose that college because it was local and had a good reputation for its business program. So I went back to school nights while I was still working, and then realized that I was a lot more successful at school now that I was a little bit older and actually paying attention and invested in my education.
Yeah.
So I quit my job and went back to school full time. So I flipped the script on myself, going to school full time during the day and working nights to pay for it. And
Hmm.
in a year and a half, finished a business degree, going straight through with no breaks. And so that my, I guess, secondary education or post high school education, whatever we want to call it here, was like lots of stages in my life, a little bit unplanned, influenced
Hmm.
by outside factors, but no doubt the academic experience, but also the entire journey, to use a word that you used previously, taught me many lessons that I've been able to apply.
Let's talk about that for a little, because when we get sidetracked, if you will, as you said, you have your friends came by, the boys came in and say, hey, start whispering in your ears, and you listen to them, and you move aside from something that you kind of like. You teaching was something that motivated you initially to do. And then the bling bling got you sidetracked, as they say, because we tend to, the society that we are part of, they teach us to go after that money. And we're not realizing that money is not the key that makes us happy or anything like that, because we know if that was the case and if that was true, a lot of millionaires would not be committing suicide. So talk to us about that influence that took place there, and leaving something that you really wanted to do this thing that these boys, as they say, whispering in your ears. to go after the bling bling in the 90s. And I remember the 90s.
Yeah, and you've got a very good point. What makes us happy is often an individual decision. It's based on perspective, it's based on where we are, where we come from, where we want to be, all of these other things. And I think for me at that point, it wasn't the allure of the money, so to speak. I mean, that was part of it, certainly as
Hmm.
somebody in a special education teaching role as a young man straight out of college, you're probably
Yeah.
not going to build a nest egg doing that, right? But even as I made the switch, the money wasn't necessarily tremendous, at least not right away.
Yeah.
But it had, it was like the complete package, working for a bigger company and the opportunity to move up and
Yeah.
the bigger money and the potential of if you go do these things, you can make that. So I think it was the whole package that was alluring, not just the money itself.
Hmm.
But then you're right. Once I got there, it ended up being the exact wrong environment for me. And I made it 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days before I finally quit. And that is an accurate number. So, you know, but like you talked about the journey earlier, sometimes we can't find the thing that we want until we end up stumbling through a few things that we don't want. And there are at least dozens, if not hundreds of things that I learned during that stage of my professional development that I still use all the time and I still leverage and look back on all the time. And sometimes it can be as simple as having that anchor. Well, at least I'm not doing that. Or,
Yeah.
what I'm doing now isn't as tough or isn't as displeasurable or, so there's whether it's the juxtaposition and the mental anchors, whether it is using the actual lessons that we got from it, I certainly still look at that as an important stage. But I'm also very fortunate because teaching is what I do. And although that was a 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days out of my life, it helped get me to a point where now for decades, under a different umbrella, if you will, but teaching is what I do. So instead of
Yeah.
teaching school kids, I teach professionals, and
Yeah.
it's still very much a part of who I am. And I still get to teach kids through the youth sports that I coach. So I still get to have that impact there as well. So once we know what makes us happy and what is meaningful for us, we can find ways to create those opportunities. It doesn't necessarily have to be by somebody else's book.
Yeah, teaching comes in many different forms, Michael. I
Mhm.
mean, you alluded to it. There's so many different, and we kind of put it in pigeonhole that it's just going into school and so forth. But yeah, it comes in many different forms. But I believe personally, the dark times are there to get you the best lessons. You're not going to gain any lessons in the good times, basically, because you are just floating along. But when the hard times come, that's when you learn the good stuff, the stuff that will sustain you through the um, the easy times, if you will. But the hard times are there for a purpose. It is where you are um, where you gain insight, where you gain wisdom, where you gain all the stuff that is necessary. I'm telling you, I'm 63. And as I look back in my life, the hard times is where I gained the good stuff to help me to navigate and be grateful and thankful for the good times. As you're moving through and you got your 2 years and you're there a couple of days in and you are going to make that switch. What made you do it? I understand the frustration on this end, but business as to what made you go to that direction and not something else. And I know you pinpointed a couple of things that the school was qualified and all these different things, but there was something else had to be internal that was driving it to that direction with those qualifications that the school had, which is great, but there was an internal thing that was causing you to head in that direction. Do you remember what it was that pushed you that way?
Yeah, I would love to enthrall your audience with this story of an internal calling that was just overwhelming. But the reality is, at that point, I had done a pretty good job of identifying what I didn't want to do next, but hadn't done such a great job of identifying exactly what I wanted to do next. And my
Yeah,
honest thought was a business degree would give me enough of an education to leave enough doors open that I could go figure out what would come next. So it
yeah,
wasn't I had this internal calling that this was what I have to go do. It was, A little bit of the opposite. Well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next, but I need to have some sort of qualification and preparation to be able to do it. So why don't I go get a business degree, leave as many doors open as possible, and then try to find my way through the right one?
Once you got it, you got that, as they say, you swung the tassel, you toss everything up, you got the paper, and they tell you that you're now a qualified businessman, as they say. Where did you land up?
So when I was going back to school, in order to pay my bills, I was working nights. So I was one of those, you could say kid, I was in my early 20s at this point, but I would leave the house every morning with all 3 meals in a cooler, and I would go to school all day, and I would eat in my car, and then I would go to work all night, and I'd get a couple hours of sleep, and I would do it again. So I loaded freight on airplanes at the airport in the winter, which was fun. I worked on loading docks. I drove delivery trucks. I worked at bars. I built elevators for a little while. But I ended up with a job in the security field that was just a part-time job. Around the same time I was finishing up my degree, that part-time job had morphed its way into a management job. And
Yeah.
so I stayed there assuming that I would get management experience on my resume. So now I would have a business degree and I would have
Mhm.
management experience. And then I could use that
Yeah.
business degree in management to go get a bigger job with a bigger company and do,
Yeah.
more traditional business things. And that's not what happened. It ended up that I stuck in that route, which eventually led me to interview and interrogation, which eventually led me to the discipline listening method, which eventually led me to this conversation today. So when a lot of times when people ask me about, my professional journey, it is really so far the culmination of a bunch of happy accidents, a bunch of opportunities that maybe I didn't anticipate or I was too dumb to say no to. I just said
Yeah.
yes and accepted it and took the challenge and moved on. But a lot of it really was unplanned and just I guess the ability to take advantage of the opportunities as they presented themselves.
And as you are planning and being unplanned, as you're staying in this position here and it begins to morph, as you said, as to who you are today. When that began to take place, what was happening to this young man, if you will, at that time? Because again, he is looking at, and everyone does that, I mean, hey, I just need the management thing. I need to, I got plans. What was happening with him when this shift is slowly taking place where he's not able, if you will, to make that jump. And he is in this position and now he sees an opportunity to take it. What was happening in his life?
I think for me, it's just the arc of life, just that growth journey of being in that stage where I say we're all, I mean, it probably hits us at different times in different ways, but we're all looking to figure out who we are and what we want and developing personal relationships and understanding our identity a little bit clearer and going
Hmm.
through our professional opportunities. So for me, and this can probably go back to some of the conversations we started with my father. Adventure and challenge was something that I never really wanted to walk away from. So being offered an opportunity, being offered a job, being offered a chance to move, being offered a chance to develop new skills, being offered a chance to do something that not a lot of people around me had been successful doing. All of these things, I just saw them as opportunities. So even now as I work with families and they'll talk to me about, how do I get my kid ready for college interviews? And so we sit down to help prep them for that. Or sometimes I'll have colleagues that I've worked with say, I'm having a hard time connecting with my son or daughters, typically more son. Can you please sit down and have a conversation with him and understand what's really going on? So for me, it's throughout that stage of my journey, it was just taking advantage of the opportunities as they were presented
Yeah.
where just, when I say ask less questions, I don't mean be ignorant to what's going on around you, but
Hmm.
ask less questions and take more action. If there's a passive decision and an active decision, make the active decision and see where it leads you.
And as you're developing your skill set, if you will, because one has to develop that skill set to begin to investigate, what were some of the tools that you started to implement and you saw the outcome that you were getting or desired outcome that you wanted as you were implementing some of those tools?
Yeah, so if we go back to that stage in my career, there were specific tools, right? Like the interview and interrogation techniques that I was being taught to use. And
Yeah.
thankfully, I had amazing mentors and I was turned on to the most effective techniques very early on. So I didn't have to stumble through a lot of the, oh, what you see on TV really doesn't work. And I should probably stop doing that stage that some investigators go through. But I think for me, the tools that I latched onto that were really helpful, and I think it speaks to what you're working to do with this show as well, is the ability to empathize with others, the ability to truly connect with others, the ability to listen and hear somebody else's story, the ability to communicate with somebody in a way that allows them to demonstrate how they want to be communicated with, and then
Hmm.
being aware enough to give them the experience that they need at that moment. So I think those tools, which really comes down to embracing the universality of the human experience, as human
Yeah.
beings, when we are in some of these trials or tribulations or dark times, as you said, or difficult conversations, what do we need to experience in order to truly connect with the person on the other side to work together to get to a satisfactory outcome? And those satisfactory outcomes can range from, is it to confess to something that I've done that I shouldn't have? Is it to tell the truth about something that's not necessarily bad, but I've just never been comfortable telling the truth about it?
Yeah.
Is it solving a problem together in a relationship? Or to get to some of the more powerful things that you're talking about here, is it to go one more day without ending my life? Or is it to
Yeah.
engage somebody at a level where I'm willing to start seeking the deep change that I need in my life? So there's a whole wide range of that. But really, what I was starting to learn at that point was that getting somebody to quote unquote confess, all that
Hmm.
really is getting somebody to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. And
Yeah.
for anybody listening to this conversation, if you are talking to a child who is struggling at school, if you're talking to a coworker that's struggling in their role, if you're talking to a family member or somebody that you care about that's struggling with anything in their life, if you were trying to get them to open up, well, what you're trying to do is get them to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. And
Yeah.
that the major overarching consequence could just be feeling embarrassed and judged. And so if we're
Yeah.
going to work somebody through that arc, well, then being able to demonstrate empathy, being able to build rapport, being able to use not of listening skills, where we're not just performing as if we are listening, but truly uncovering the hidden value that builds the trust based on evidence that allows us to move the relationship forward. All of these things are critical steps in the process. And those were things that perhaps shockingly to people, I learned as a young professional interrogator. And it carries over into all aspects and all relationships in our life.
Relationships are relationships, Michael. Doesn't matter where they're at work, where they're in your house. Doesn't matter where there is. When you're dealing with an individual, a relationship, that's what it means, is you're having a relationship. And so you have to apply all the different methods and tools and so forth. As this young man is having all of these tools at his disposal, talk to us as to you now, the impact of all of this knowledge. How were you changing as a result of having all of this? You're seeing it working on others. How is it beginning to work on you?
So I don't know how many times your audience has heard somebody say this, but being a professional interrogator made me a far more empathetic human being. So the more I was interviewing people, the more I was recognizing that well over 90, maybe over 95, maybe 97, 98% of the people that I was speaking with were good people that made regrettable decisions based on the situations they were in at the time. Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they're not responsible for their decisions. They are. But had
Hmm.
they been in a different set of circumstances, they would have made a different decision. And learning to recognize and acknowledge that was very important. So, that part of my journey, getting to where I am now as a human being, believe it or not, being a professional interrogator made me far more empathetic. It opened
Yeah.
my eyes so much more to the power of context. What have people experienced in their life? What are they experiencing right now? Are they really being disrespectful, or is this a reflection of their current emotional state? Are they really ignoring me, or is this what they look like when they listen? Did they really mean what I interpreted that sentence to be, or is that the best way they're able to articulate it at this moment based on what they're feeling? So
Yeah.
the increased empathy, the increased contextual awareness, the understanding the power of somebody's situation influences all of these things. understanding what motivates people, understanding what causes people to experience fear and shuts them down. All of these things and more, but just being more observant of my surroundings and understanding how every little thing impacts how people communicate with each other. All of those things have made me a better human being. I've said to my son so many times that, yeah, I wish that he and I were able to start our relationship when I was much younger, right? Because who wouldn't want
Yeah.
that? But I'm a far better dad right now than I would have been if I had my son 10 years before I did. So yeah, he'd be 10 years
Yeah.
older now and he'd be a young adult and we'd be able to do a lot of different things together and that would be awesome. But I wouldn't be
Yeah.
the dad that I am now. And the jury is still out on how good a dad I am. Don't get me wrong. But I wouldn't be the dad I am now if I had my son 10 years earlier. So the ability to connect, establish often unlikely relationships, build rapport, encourage people to tell the truth, create commitments to changing their behavior, all of those things have made me a better person. And there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Once you are exposed to that type of thing, you have to change. You just have to change. It does that to you. Rearranges your internal compass. You're here and talk to us as to the manifestation of your book. How did all of this knowledge and all the different things? I know you do a lot of coaching, you do a lot of teaching, you do a lot of speak, all of that. How did this begin to morph towards the book where you began to put this knowledge in that format so that folks like myself can have access to that?
Appreciate you asking. And it really was, I couldn't even call it the culmination, but the next step in a journey. And sometimes people will just assume or they'll ask, what was the calling or when, you always wanted to be an author. Actually, no. Like I didn't wake
Yeah.
up wanting to be an author, right? I had people around me encouraging me to do it, but it wasn't something I really wanted to do necessarily or sought out to do. It became more of a necessity. When I say that, I don't mean it to sound arrogant in any way, shape, or form. So I apologize if it did. You talked earlier about, I think the word you used was programs, but often when people are in certain situations or they're studying certain things or they're in certain fields, often the information that they're presented with is from that same silo.
Hmm.
When in reality, often the most important lessons happen at the intersection of information that normally wouldn't cross over. And so
Yeah.
for me in my field, when I was fully immersed in interview and interrogation, once I had exposure to a handful of tremendous techniques, really what I started seeking out was not why do people confess, but what causes people to choose to open up and tell the truth in these types of situations. And these types of situations aren't interrogations, they're
Yeah.
stressful conversations. So now I take that and it leads me to trust and influence and persuasion and psychology and how the brain works and how the decision making process works and the role of emotions and the genesis of emotions and all these other things. And so now pulling all of those together made me far more successful at my job and working with, as you said, CEOs and sales teams and professional negotiators and imparting it on them and seeing the impact that they had. So really the goal with the book was to provide people with the skills, perspective, and technique to uncover this hidden value, to build stronger relationships, to create commitment over compliance by applying all of the research and skills and examples, not just in their professional lives, but in their personal lives, with their families, as consumers, as they build important relationships. Because when we learn to value relationships and outcomes over all else, now we're able to put together the strategic observation and persuasive communication techniques to help us achieve those goals. And those techniques don't come from one genre, if you will. They're the
Yeah.
amalgamation of the best from multiple genres.
Yeah, as a contract negotiator, and back in my day, I had to put a lot of things together as well and learn little things as even body language, Michael. I had to learn, I had trained my staff because I understood body language and how NLP and all the different things. I had trained them the opposite so that when to use the opposite type of expectation in the body language, I had to train them and train them and train them. And so that crossing your hand, that would look as if you are not listening or paying attention or closing the deal, angry or whatever, was they were being relaxed. And I would tell them this, you relax this way. And so they would think that but they're absolutely focused, paying attention to everything. So I kind of flipped it. And that team of mine became pretty proficient, if you will, at what we were doing. And I had a lot of fun. But you guys that are listening to us, the tools that Michael is talking about in that book, The Discipline Listening Method, get it. I'm telling you, get it. As one who was in that aspect in corporate America, dealing and understanding the language that he's talking about, you need this type of book to have in all relationships, in all of it, man. I'm telling you. And I'm so glad that here is someone that put it together like this for you guys. Buy it. I've been telling people for the longest while, buy books as a group. Sit down, talk about it. What did you see? How did and so that you guys can grow as an individual and learn. And we're going to provide all the links for you guys to get access to him so that you can learn, man, and become effective at your job, but also become effective in your relationship with your family and friends and so forth, so that you can see the benefit of it. So here you are, man. You've done so much. Again, I didn't even know where to start. I'm looking at all the things that you have done, and I'm like, I'm just going to let him ride. We're looking at the planet right now, man, and people are all over the place. There's concerns here and there and so forth. I want you to do me a favor. You have a mic. This mic is plugged into all of us. There are a couple of billion people on this planet. What would you say?
We have far more in common. And when you look at the universality of the human experience as human beings, no matter where we're from, no matter what our experience is, we have more in common than we don't. And unfortunately, right or left, right or wrong makes no difference. That's not what this conversation is about. But the more we get trapped into this one side or the other mentality, the more we take our focus away from what we have in common with others, and the more we focus on what do we have in common with this group that we want to be identified with. So I
Yes.
think what sounds like, the genesis of your show is, how do we connect with people better? How do we understand people better? How do we help people through harder times together? How do we help people get through the other side together? You can look at that at the micro level, one human being to another, or you could look at it as a macro level, society, groups of
Hmm.
people to another. And just like we started out at the beginning of this conversation, we all have the opportunity to choose. Am I going to look for a way to connect and assist? Or am I going to look for a way to fall back to what I'm comfortable with? You talked about that before. So
Yeah,
often, the moment somebody's statements make you uncomfortable, that's the moment that it's most important to listen and to try to understand. And I think if we could just
absolutely.
remember that and take that into more of our conversations, we'll be able to connect with more people. We'll be able to help more people. And in our own way, one conversation at a time, we can make this world a better place.
Absolutely agree. I want to pick your brain on something. You have so many stories that you have seen transformation from people, and as you were able to engage in deep conversation and able to switch the perception as they were caught in that for a long time, and were able to move that needle, if you will, and create that new perspective that they had to cause them to walk into that freedom. Invite us to one of those times, if you will, that someone may have been, dark space and may have been there for a while. And there might have been one of those strangers that you met at an airport, as you said it in the onset, that you had an opportunity to have an engaged conversation with. Talk to us about one of those or several of those, how you feel to engage and allow us to hear and to imagine that powerful story that you're talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. I've got one that comes to mind that I'll share, but even before I do, to set it up, it's important to remember that as human beings, generally, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, more motivated to withhold information than we are to share it. We're more
Hmm.
motivated to protect our self-image, to save face, to avoid embarrassment and judgment and consequences. So often as people, when we see somebody who we believe needs help, who we can help, often inadvertently, we proceed in a way that causes them to feel embarrassed, to feel judged, to feel put under a spotlight, to have to confess, so to speak, because they're backed into a corner. And so, as we're connecting with people in these opportunities, letting them take the lead in the conversation, trying not to jump in with advice or trying not to jump in with a time we were in the same situation. Try not to convince somebody that we understand a situation that we might feel like we do, but we almost certainly don't, at least not entirely, because we don't wake up in their shoes every single day. They're the only ones that truly understand it. So connecting with somebody who is going through dark times is identical to connecting with somebody in an interview room or in any other of the analogies that we've previously used. But there was one scenario. I spent several weeks traveling and teaching in the Middle East. And after wrapping up a session in Amman, Jordan, I was the last one left in the hotel ballroom, and I was packing up my gear and getting ready to go. And as I was, a woman walked in, and she walked in and asked me if she could talk to me. And she was, what's the right word I want to use? You could tell that she was, I guess I'll go with nervous for now, but she was nervous about starting the conversation. So of course I said yes, right? I mean, quite frankly, I didn't have any other options, but I was also
Yeah.
happy to have the conversation. So, we've all been in the hotel ballrooms before. So there's the big
Yeah.
circle tables, and I don't know who she is. I don't know why she's nervous. So I left some space in between her and I. There were two empty chairs in between where she was sitting and where I was sitting. And so for me, really, to summarize the story, because I don't want to bore your listeners to death with the whole thing, but you could tell she was trying to work herself up to a place where she felt comfortable talking. So for
Yeah.
me, it was listening. It was about asking follow-up questions. It was about showing no judgment. It was about finding little ways to show understanding without acting like I was putting myself in somebody's shoes. And it turned out that she was having an issue with her family and specifically with her husband. And she had tried talking to her husband about it before, and he didn't listen. And she wanted a new technique to talk to her husband, which, as you know, is a very difficult place to be in, because how do I tell somebody else how your family is supposed to work, or what the right or wrong decision is, or what he should or shouldn't
Yeah.
say, or what you should or shouldn't do? So it really was an example of, not telling somebody, well, go home and say this, and not telling somebody, go home and do that. But in any situation, or many, I shouldn't say any, in many situations, it was really take a step back and think about, if this is the direction you want your family to go, what does your husband need to experience before he commits to it? The problem
Yeah.
we need to solve isn't what do you need to say, or isn't what you need to do. It's what does the other person need to experience. And that is
Hmm.
true in so many examples and so many stories and so many relationships in our life. The right answer to the wrong question is still the wrong answer.
Hmm.
So if somebody says, what should I say? And I say, well, this is what you should say. That might be what they should say, but that could still be the wrong answer, because we're not asking the right question. The right question is, what does the other person need
Yeah.
to experience? So instead of telling her what to do, it was really leading through a conversation of, what does your husband need to experience? What is his role in the family? What's his role in his job? What's his role in the community? How does he see himself? How does he like to be presented? How does he like to make decisions? What's his current set of motivations? What is his current set of concerns? And we worked through the whole thing. And by the time we were done, she and I were done. She had a big exhale, said, thank you very much. She hadn't thought about it that way. And she was going to change her approach over time. We're not going to try to change anything in one conversation, but over time
Yeah.
to move in that direction. And to be honest, she lives on the other side of the world, and we lost touch many years ago, but hopefully that worked out for her. What I can say is that the sense of relief as she got up and walked away from the table was palpable. And I think in general, and I know that I'm using my example for this, so people can make fun of me for my bias, and I would only encourage them. I wouldn't blame them. But as a general example, by taking a step back to not give advice, to not tell people you understand, to not tell them what they should or shouldn't do, but to help lead them through a conversation of discovery based around, in this case, what their counterpart needs to experience, then allows them the ownership of their own education, their own alternatives, and their own mind shift moving forward.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment and giving us that example, because that is a perfect example. Again, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.